So thank you all for coming to today's installment of the Philosophy and Contemporary Future Science Seminar Series. Reminder that past recordings can be found on our website. That's www.pocfs.org. We're also on Twitter @POCFS. And if you want to be added to our mailing list to find out about sort of upcoming seminars and other events, you can email us at pocfs@ln.edu.hk, or just send me your email here in the chat and I will add you. So today we're very lucky to be joined by Mario Krenn. Mario completed his PhD at the University of Vienna, Austria, and did postdoctoral training at the University of Toronto at the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence. Since the end of 2021, he's led the Artificial Scientists Lab at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Light in Berlin, Germany. You can find out more about his work at mariokrenn.wordpress.com. And today, Mario will be talking to us. We'll be giving a talk entitled Towards an Artificial Muse for New Ideas in Physics. Okay, thank you, Mario. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. Let me quickly share my screen. Does it work?
Looks good.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. This is actually, I think, my first talk to philosophers in the philosophy department. So that is very cool. I'm very happy. Thanks. So yeah, my name is Mario Krenn. I'm leading the Artificial Scientist Lab at the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Light in Erlangen in Germany. And the goal of my group is to develop AI algorithm from which we can get new ideas, from which we can learn new concepts, and which kind of shows us new research directions. And we do this mainly in two different ways. The first way is we use AI for the design of new experiments, mainly in the quantum and quantum optics regime. And the second is we use huge amount of scientific literature and try to create personalized, interesting future research directions for individual researchers. And I will mention both of those projects briefly during my talk. So, okay, I want to talk about a project that was done over more than 2.5 years. So it deals with the question of how we can actually advance science at a conceptual level with AI. And the setting is the following. So imagine that you have an oracle that correctly predicts the outcome of every particle physics experiment, of the product of every chemical reaction, or the function of every protein. Such an oracle would obviously be extremely helpful and will revolutionize science and technology as we know them. But as scientists, we would maybe not be completely satisfied because we usually want more. We want to know how the machine came up with those predictions. So we want to know basically what the machine has understood about the world. Because in the end, we want to get this scientific understanding. And scientific understanding is often called the essential aim of science, or one of the essential aims of science. And this idea is also very old. It can trace back. The first instance where I have found it was 2,500 years ago, when Heraclitus said, "To know a lot does not teach reason." So now with this ever-growing powerful algorithms, AI algorithms, and huge amount of compute, the question is now, how can we actually use those systems to get new scientific understanding at a conceptual level, and potentially in the future, how those systems could get scientific understandings themselves and then hopefully teach it to us. So we believe that this is not only a technical question, but actually touches the foundations of science itself. And this article is the result of 2.5 years investigation where we tried to approach this question of how AI can help to get scientific understanding. And to answer these questions, we approach it from two different directions. So first, we collected personalized anecdotes from more than 50 computational physicists and computational chemists and computational biologists. And we asked those scientists about personalized or personal stories of how they got new scientific understanding, new scientific ideas using advanced computational systems and artificial intelligence. And second, we looked into the philosophy of science and explore what philosophers actually mean by scientific understanding. And a very helpful work that we found was a book by the Dutch philosopher Henk de Rek called Understanding Scientific Understanding. But it was published in 2017, so it's rather new, and it got the Lakatos Award for the best contribution in philosophy of science in 2019. So de Rek says that scientists can understand the phenomena if they can recognize qualitative characteristic consequences without performing exact computations or calculations. So in some way, scientific understanding is connected with the skill to use concepts fruitfully without exact computations. And we took the answers from the scientists and this part of the philosophy, and in our article very roughly classified the potential approaches into three different domains. And the first dimension for computer-assisted scientific understanding is a computational microscope, which human can use to see something in a computational way that is very difficult to see in the experiment. And here the human has to take this insight and lift it to real understanding. The second approach is AI as a source of inspiration for new ideas or for inspirations. And we call this sometimes the artificial muse. And scientists here take these new ideas, take this inspiration, and also they have to generalize. They have to put out the scientific understanding or introduce the scientific understanding in those ideas. And the third part is AI as an agent of understanding, which gains new understanding in an autonomous way and can communicate it to humans. So we have not found any indications that this agent of understanding already exists, but we explored a few hypothetical scenarios of what such an agent would look like, how we can see that we have an agent of understanding. Okay, now let's start with the first class. First class computational microscope. So here the AIs are acting as a microscope, like a scientific instrument that reveals property of a system that would otherwise be very difficult to see. And the important thing is, as I briefly mentioned, the human in this case needs to lift this insight to real understanding. And we identified roughly two different approaches for this class. The one is based, it's very technology based, and the other one is based on new representation, new data representation. So on the one hand, we can think about building better microscope that can look into the systems. So what it means would be we build new algorithms, we use advanced computational platforms, for instance, GPUs, TPUs, OPUs, these are optical processing units, or quantum computers, where we can then analyze much larger and more complex systems. So those could be part of future computational microscopes. The second part is the usage of new ways to represent data. And for this, the data could be augmented, for instance, using virtual reality or augmented reality with 3D glasses. That would be one potential. And an exciting direction of this is actually this virtual reality, where you see the space in a way different, in a very different way than usual. This is already used in some works in chemistry, where the scientist can then go through this virtual space and observe 3D structures and observe sorted molecular spaces in 3D that you would never see without that. And of course, the hypothesis here is that with this interactive 3D environment, you would perceive the data in a very different way, in a more holistic way. And therefore, maybe this helps you to find new crucial structures and relations that you can describe that you would otherwise completely miss. The other way to extend data representation is by using a different type of sense, namely our ears. And this approach has been explored quite a lot in astronomy, where weak signals with very noisy backgrounds are sonified. There's a phrase for that. The word is sonification. So you take your data and you produce audio data of it. That's called sonification. And in astronomy, there are more than 100 research projects about sonification, where they modify the data into a way that we can hear it. And in that way, we can hear structure that is completely impossible to see. So there are websites where you can test, for instance, this is a structure of a gravitational wave. There's a huge background in it, and you have no chance to see that there is a gravitational wave. But then when you hear it, when you transform it to sound, you actually can hear it. You hear that there is definitely something there. So it's very impressive that the ear can give you or can see structure, can hear structure in a very different way. That works very well for time domain data. And I highly recommend looking into this. This is really impressive to see the contrast of ear versus eye. And the interesting thing in astronomy, they also already start to explore devices with haptic response. That means you feel data. And this is a different way how we can get new insights from the data, or how we can perceive the data in a different way. And in the end, maybe the most powerful algorithm that we could think of would combine all of those techniques. So it's an algorithm that might identify symmetries and then projects it into a 3D movie with sound, maybe where we can also feel something, and we perceive the data in a very different way. And this might help us to get new insights, to see those insights in a much more easy way, and then see how we can generalize it to real scientific understanding. Okay, so this was class 1, the computational microscope. Now let me go to class 2. So the second class is, we call it source of inspiration, or sometimes actually resource of inspiration. This is when the AI acts as an artificial muse, as a source of inspiration for new concepts or ideas. And here still, the AI gives the ideas and concepts, but the human has to lift those inspiration to real scientific understanding. And I will show a number of examples here, and I would like to start with one example from my own research. So a lot of my research, or a big part of my research, is about discovering and designing new experiments, mainly in the quantum regime. And this started actually quite some years ago during my PhD. I did my PhD in an experimental quantum optics group, in the group of Anton Zeilinger, who got the Nobel Prize last year. And in this group, we wanted to explore new structures of quantum entanglement, so very complex entangled quantum states. And usually when we want to do this, so the first thing you need is you need to find the experimental setup that can produce your quantum state. And usually when we do this, we go to a blackboard or to a piece of paper, and we find the experimental setup rather quickly, such that we can go in the lab and then spend some time to actually produce this state and observe their properties. But during my PhD, there was a case when we wanted to create a specific entangled state. And we were thinking about it, how could we create it? And we couldn't come up for any feasible experimental setup for days, then for weeks. And this was not only me, it was 2 or 3 experimental friends and some theory friends, and we were not able to find any experimental setup that we could build in the lab. So we were not able to observe the properties of this very interesting quantum state that we had in mind. And at that time, I thought maybe somehow our human intuition is in the way of finding those experiments. Maybe those experiments are actually, they can be done, but they are somehow unintuitive, such that it's difficult for us to find it. So I thought about removing the human from the loop and automating the process of design of the experiment. And I can show you now a simple algorithm that I've built at that time. So the idea was that we start with a toolbox. Can you see my mouse pointer? Yes. So we start with a toolbox, and this toolbox contains all optical elements that we have in our laboratory. For instance, lasers and beam splitter and phase shifters and so on. And from these optical elements, we start to generate, in the beginning, some random setups. And the computer just puts together in a virtual table a random setup and then computes the output of the random setup. And if it is not, if it doesn't fulfill our criteria, it goes back. It goes back and produces a new experiment and tries again. If it, however, satisfies some of our criteria, the setup is reported to the user, and it is then simplified and put into its own toolbox. So the simplified setup that satisfies our criteria is put into the algorithm's own toolbox, such that in the next generation it can already use those experiments that it believes are useful. And that speeds up the design process of quantum experiments a lot. So then in the next iteration, you can already use those macro elements and find more and more clever experiments. And actually, I built this algorithm, I let it run overnight. And in the morning, I came back and found actually a solution.txt file at my desktop, which had exactly that, the setup for the experiment that we were searching for many weeks. And obviously, we were very happy that this was possible. And we were also very surprised that the computer found this and we couldn't find this. And it turned out that the experiment is quite unusual. It's highly unsymmetric and so on. It's quite intuitive, but it works perfectly. And then within the course of, I think, 3 years or so, my colleagues, mainly Manuel Erhard, was building then this experiment, and we were able to observe the properties that we wanted to observe from the beginning. So here we were very happy and we applied this algorithm and since then much more advanced algorithms for designing experiments to many different questions. But what I find most interesting is that we can actually learn new ideas from these algorithms. And that worked. I would like to tell this in one short story. So after we found these experiments, I thought about maybe we can explore the space of a very complex type of entanglement in a more general way. And I copied this algorithm and I put it to many of the unused computers in our labs. And I gave the algorithm a certain constraint such that I knew it cannot produce anything higher than any entanglement larger than a certain amount. Because if you give it too much resources, the computation takes very long, and I want that it explores the space a lot. So I reduced the resources that I gave it. And I knew, okay, it cannot surpass a very specific limit. And then a few weeks later, when I collected all of the results from the computers, I actually found that one of the solutions was significantly higher than the value that I thought is the absolute maximum. And first I thought, of course, that's a bug in the program because those algorithms are very good in exploiting any bug that you do in your codes. But it turned out that this solution was actually very sensible, and you can then actually compute it by hand. So the question was, what did the computer do? And from the solution, I took the solution and I analyzed it for a number of days. And then at some point, I saw that the computer completely implicitly connected the generation of entanglement to a technique that I knew was pioneered in the early 90s in a lab in Rochester in the USA. So completely implicitly, the computer has connected two fields that it didn't know about and was able to use this connection to generate quantum entanglement that is much more general, or a much more general design that we were aware of beforehand. And when I understood the first example and we discussed them, we were very quickly able to generalize it to many other entangled quantum systems. So we were then very happy to write a theory paper about this and publish it. We were happy to publish it in a good physics journal in PRL. And if you think about it, the conceptual core of the idea of this theory paper in this good physics journal, it didn't come from any of the co-authors. The conceptual idea came completely implicitly from a computer. And we as the human then just had to understand what the computer was doing. So we found this very interesting. And this was one of the reasons why I thought, okay, AI in science could have a huge, huge impact. So this is one example of a source of inspiration. So we were inspired to think about, to see this, from seeing this solution, to think about how entanglement generation can be generalized. And we got ideas for which now we don't need computers anymore to design them by hand. So we clearly got some new scientific understanding. And this could be formulated as a way of anomaly detection. So we found that the computer produced the anomaly, maybe not anomaly detection, but even anomaly generation. We found that the computer generated the anomaly in the size of the entanglement. I knew there's a bound, but my thought was wrong. The computer was able to overcome that. So it was very clear that we need to look into this system. So in that way, the computer was able to show us here there seems to be an interesting part of the space that you should look at. Now, a different example for AI as a resource of inspiration is using large collection of scientific literature. And I would like to show this on two examples. So the first example is from chemistry. So here, chemists have used roughly 3 million papers, and they used a tool that's called word-to-vec encoding. So with that tool, you take your text and you project this text into a continuous, very high-dimensional space um, uh, that encodes all of the words in a high-dimensional vector. So every word is placed in a high-dimensional vector space. And what the authors then found is that with this encoding, they used material science and chemistry paper. And with this encoding, they saw that the materials and the property of the materials are very closely projected into the space. So they saw, for instance, when they looked at the property thermoelectric, they saw that many of the materials that are known to be thermoelectric are very close to this concept. So then they went further and looked further, and they saw the first 325 materials that are close. They are all thermoelectric. It was known they are thermoelectric. But then the 326th element was not known to be thermoelectric. That means there's no paper whatsoever in the scientific literature that says this material is thermoelectric. But the machine clustered it together. It said potentially it has some hidden properties. So the texts where it's written about it have some hidden properties that it would make sense that this has thermoelectric. So basically, just by looking at this automated way of encoding text into high-dimensional vector space, the authors were able to identify new materials that were not known to have a specific property. And as far as I know, those experiments are now being conducted in some labs. I don't know whether they are already results. I should really look at this, whether number 326 and 345 are actually thermoelectric. But at least that's a, for me, very interesting way to see from this big picture of 3 million papers some emerging properties that are not explicitly written. Okay, a different project, or a different way to use large amount of scientific literature is the building of large semantic network, or large knowledge graphs. And so here the idea is that you build a knowledge graph where the vertices stand for scientific concepts and the edges are drawn when two concepts appear together in a scientific abstract or title. That means when they co-appear in one article, basically when they are researched together. And this idea has been pioneered by computational sociologists and biochemists back in, I think it was 2015, in a group of James Evans in Chicago. And when I saw what they have done in biology, I thought this is absolutely amazing. And I wanted to apply this now also to quantum mechanics. So the idea here is you build this large knowledge graph which develops over the years, because you have your concepts and the edges are drawn when new papers appear. So this graph grows, and now you can observe how this graph grows over in quantum physics over the last 100 years. But when you have now the data of how a large graph develops over the last 100 years, you can actually ask the question, how will it evolve over the next 3 years or the next 5 years? So this is then basically in the setting a link prediction task. How can I predict which new edges will appear? And if you think now what that actually means is, you predict which concepts that have never been investigated together, which of those will be investigated in the next 3 years by scientists. So basically, you in some way try to predict what the scientific community will work on in the next years. And this worked actually quite well. The predictability is quite high. And 1.5 years ago, we performed the AI competition where we took the knowledge graph of artificial intelligence research and we predicted, or the task was to predict the next few years for AI research. And there were 20 or 30 teams that took part of the competition, and with many different techniques, with transformers, with graph neural networks, automated feature extraction. They were able to push this predictability way, way higher than what I was able to do. Yeah. So, right, the idea of how you could predict this is you take your knowledge graph from the year 2017 and you put it into a neural network. And you ask the neural network to predict which unconnected vertex pair will be connected in the year 2022. And of course, for the year 2022, we have the research. We know what has been connected until that year. So we can give perfect feedback, a supervision signal. And so in that way, by taking many millions of unconnected vertex pairs in this year and giving the correct signal, the neural network can learn to predict what will be done. And then as soon as it finished the prediction, as soon as it saturated the learning, you can now take the neural network, give the data from 2022 to predict what will happen until the year 2027. So you basically can predict into the future with this approach. You can validate this by shifting everything back by 5 years. And then you see this, the prediction of the neural network, 5 years shifted works very well. Yeah. And the interesting thing for me is not necessarily the prediction itself, but that we could potentially use such a tool for suggestions, for personalized suggestions. So here the idea is the following. I take one individual researcher and look at this researcher's concept or research concept or research interest. So we have now one researcher, and we could take a second researcher and take the second researcher's research interest. And even if those researchers are conceptual far away or their work is far away, the neural network could find edges that have never been investigated together, but that it thinks will be investigated in the next few years. So somehow what it thinks you should and could work on. And we are trying to build such a tool now, and let's see how that works. And in the end, you could think about adding more different type of metric of success in such a tool. But now to go back to resource of inspiration, here the inspiration would come from the AI to tell you or to give you some ideas of which direction you could work on that you potentially would have not thought about because the topic is too far away, but it could give you some hint in which way you could work on this. Okay, so this was a second way how one can think about AI as a resource of inspiration. Now, a third way would be having interpretable results. So the neural network learns something, or some AI system learns to solve a task, and in the end, the solution of the task is presented in a way that we can understand. One example are mathematical formulas. So with mathematical formulas, we can usually quite quite quickly interpret, at least when there are physics formulas. If you're a physicist and those are physics formulas and they are not too crazy, we can usually quite quickly interpret them. This is a technique that is called symbolic regression, where you take a neural network and after it's trained, you try to extract some symbolic representation of its knowledge. A different way of interpretable result would be graphs, which you can interpret. For instance, nowadays, most of our AI designs for quantum experiments, we don't work with optical elements anymore, but we work with graphs that have some very specific physical meaning. And we now, as trained physicists, we can interpret those graphs rather quickly. So the machine finds a solution. The solution is a graph. The graph is very simple. And we can just look at the graph and say, oh, okay, that's this very specific interference pattern. I would not have thought about it. That's useful in this case. But now I know, now I can use it for other things as well. Fourth type of example for source of inspiration would be to have interpretable internal states of the neural network. And here, the idea is that you have a neural network, but you put in a bottleneck layer that, or you just look into the neural network and see what it is doing. And there are a few very interesting examples. I would like to explain one of them. So here, that is an example from astronomy, where, the researchers take a neural network and they give the neural network the position of the Sun and Mars as they are seen from Earth. And the neural network should predict how those objects, those astronomical objects, how they behave in the future, so how they move in the future. And after they trained the neural network, and after the neural network has learned, okay, the Sun should go in a certain way, Mars should go in a certain way. Afterwards, they look into the neural network, into this, into some of the neurons, and they try to understand how the neural network is coming up with those predictions. And the very surprising finding of this paper is that the neural network does not use the geocentric coordinates. So here, the coordinates are given as seen from Earth. The position of Sun is seen from Earth and Mars is seen from Earth. But the neural network completely implicitly, internally, transforms those coordinates into heliocentric coordinates, so coordinates as seen from the Sun, and then uses those to predict the positions of the planets afterwards. Because it seems that it is easier to predict, easier to use for predictions. So in a way, completely implicitly, the machine was able to make the shift from the geocentric to the heliocentric worldview that has been done in the 17th century. It has been one of the biggest success of science, I would say. Yeah. And not only that, the machine did it, but the researchers was able to find that the machine was able to do that. That is very impressive. If we now would apply this similar technique to modern problems, we could maybe see new symmetries and new properties that the machine uses for easier prediction. And we can then maybe think about what those mean in the actual world. Maybe those symmetries are actually somewhere out there. Yeah, I skipped that. Okay, so this was now interpreting the internal states of the machine. And a last example that I have here is not looking at the results of the machine or what the machine is doing internally, but kind of observing the behavior of the machine. And that is a super exciting topic, which I think is way too less investigated. So I can give you one quick example. So this is in the connection or in the realm of exploration. And researchers, I think part of them was at OpenAI, and Badak is now at CMU. What they have done is they took a game, in this case, the game of Super Mario, and they tried to apply an AI algorithm to solve this game. So this has been done for quite some years. For instance, DeepMind has pioneered those techniques. And how those techniques usually work is that you give, in the end of the game, your score. So you basically tell the machine, this is your score, and your goal is to increase the score. So you have this external reward. But the cool thing that they have done in this paper is that the machine does not get any external reward. It doesn't get any score from the external world. Instead, what it gets is an incentive to go into direction that it doesn't understand very well. This is also called curiosity-driven exploration. And in this case, it works in the way the agent has a few options to do, and it has to predict what its outcome might be of that action. And if it has a huge amount of uncertainty for a prediction, then it is going into this direction. And just with this incentive, they were able, or the algorithm was able to learn and play the game of Super Mario. And later they applied it to much more complex games. And it was also able to play those games without ever getting any incentive from outside, just by a curiosity-based exploration mechanism. And you can think about it in that way. Let's say you are the Super Mario in the Super Mario world, and you go into the right direction. Okay, if you would go in the left direction, you know exactly how the world looks. So you don't want to go into the left direction. So you continue going right. After some time, those small mushrooms come and they kill you. So if you're killed, you go back to the beginning of the game. But the beginning of the game, you know already very well. So you don't want to go to the beginning of the game. So you don't want to die. So you try to prevent dying. So you will learn that it makes more sense when a mushroom comes that you jump over it, and so on. And this is basically how the algorithm was able to learn this game without any external incentive. And now imagine you would have such a system in the real world. Let's say you have a system that explores the space of all possible molecules or all possible quantum experiments. So it builds up some quantum experiments, try to predict their outcomes, and at some point it builds a quantum experiment that is very hard to predict because it uses a physical property that it has never seen before. So it will stick at this place for some time to be able to learn it. And then after it learned it, it can go further and build up other experiments until the time where, again, there's a new experiment that does something new, which you cannot predict so well. So it will stay at this place and then continue. But now if you look at this as an observer from the outside, you could actually see how this machine travels through this high-dimensional search space. And you could then look at the places where the machine was able, or where the machine stayed for quite some time, because then you could have the hypothesis that at this place there's something physically new, something physically interesting that the machine had needed some time to learn, and you maybe want to look into what is this new physical thing. So without looking at the results, without looking at the internal structure, just by observing how the machine explores this huge space in a curiosity-driven way, you could potentially get see interesting structures in this high-dimensional space. And we tried this in the space of chemistry. We found that adding this curiosity-based exploration helps in the speed of the exploration, but we were not able yet to observe the behavior itself. But if that would work, that would be really interesting. Okay, so these were now three big examples of how a machine could be seen as a resource of inspiration. Now let me go to the last class, namely the AI as an agent of understanding. And here the idea is that the AI builds up the new scientific understanding itself and then communicates it to the human. And this second part is and was very important for us. The whole goal of the article was how can we as humans get new scientific understanding from AI? We were not interested in how the machine gets scientific understanding because we are humans and I'm a human and I want to understand. And I don't care whether the machine understands yes or no. So for us, it was very important that the whole goal was about how we can get information, and therefore if the AI finds new understanding itself, how can it communicate it to us? So first, we could try to apply this criteria by Henk direct from the very beginning. We could say an AI gains scientific understanding if it can recognize qualitative characteristic consequences without performing exact computations. That's very similar than this criteria that Direct found. But the problem is that it's very difficult to find out or to check whether this criterion is satisfied, because we cannot know whether the computer used a lot of computation just by construction. And also, it is not a very productive statement, because in the end, we want to understand, as I just argued before. So we tried to modify this criterion and try to think what could it be where agent of understanding is useful for us for getting new scientific understanding. So and here we said, okay, AI has gained scientific understanding if it can transfer its understanding to a human expert. And so in this case, we don't know whether the machine has used a lot of computation, which is the thing that is excluded in direct, and which makes perfect sense to me, that you don't want to use a lot of computation, because when you understand something, you should be able to do it without computation. So in this case, we don't know whether the AI has used a lot of computation, but if it is able to transfer this insights or this understanding to a human, we know that a human cannot do a lot of scientific or a lot of computation. So and in that case, the AI was able to teach the human its new understanding. And if the human has not a new understanding, which means the human can do exactly those tasks without a lot of computation, then the human has understanding. And from that, because the AI was the teacher, we could say the AI has gained some scientific understanding. And this is actually easy to check, because now we only need to check the human. We don't need to look into the AI. The AI can do whatever it wants. It can be a computer in a room that we have no access, whatever it does. If it can teach to us, we can kind of infer that it had some sense of scientific understanding. Okay, and this brings me now to my last point. This is easy to check. One can build up, whether that's useful or not, one could build up a kind of scientific understanding test in a very similar way as a Turing test or many other tests that have been proposed in the last years. So here, the test would look like this. We have a student and we have a teacher. The teacher could be an AI or a human teacher. And now the goal is that the teacher and the student communicate. The student, for them, it doesn't matter whether he or she is knows that the teacher is a computer. So they just communicate, and the teacher tries to transfer this scientific understanding to the human. And so it wants to teach the human this new scientific understanding. And afterwards, after this is done, we have a referee, and the referee talks to the human and to the teacher. And this is hidden communication. And the dog can, if they cannot find out who is the student, then it is clear that there was some scientific understanding that was transferred to the student. And by transferring this, we can say, okay, now the teacher was able to give some scientific understanding to the student. And if the teacher could have been a computer or a human, we can then basically see, okay, the computer is already as good that it can transfer some scientific understanding to a human, and thereby in some way we could infer that the computer also had scientific understanding because it was able to teach that. Okay. Okay, so that's my last slide. To come back, now AI not only allows us to discover new exciting materials or new exciting experiments or to very advanced fitting and data reduction in high energy physics experiments in astronomy observation, but actually we can also use AI to get new understanding. Using computational microscopes, this is already done quite a lot in material science, in chemistry, also in physics more and more. And especially, I'm extremely passionate about the source and resource of inspiration, the AI as an artificial muse, which can give us ideas. This is already being done, and there are some results that show, okay, we can actually use the computer to give us new ideas. And in the end, I'm very curious whether it will be possible and how it would look like when an AI could be something like an agent of understanding and can communicate, can teach us this new understanding. And in some way, this should always be possible. At least that's my personal thought. Okay, maybe not always, but probably for a long time, this should be possible. Because if you think about, even if the AI is so far advanced, it should always be possible to break down the insight. Maybe they need to have many lectures. Maybe they need to learn new type of mathematics and so on. But I always think about, for instance, if Einstein would talk with Aristotle. Aristotle didn't know much of the mathematics, had a completely different worldview, but I'm sure that Einstein would be able to explain general relativity to Aristotle. Just need some time, but definitely Aristotle would have been able to understand it talking to Einstein. And I think a similar thing will be true for a long time with this agent of understanding. And that will be the super exciting time, I think. And I hope that is soon. Okay, thank you very much.